Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our CCC Spotlight series. For May VHL Awareness Month, we are interviewing 4 separate medical professionals from the Comprehensive Clinical Care Center at Huntsman Cancer Institute in Salt Lake City, Utah. Huntsman will be hosting this year's VHLA Annual Family Weekend in October. Today, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Benjamin Maughan. Dr. Maughan is an assistant professor in the Division of Medical Oncology at Huntsman, specializing in genitourinary malignancies. He earned his PharmD cum laude from Idaho State University in 2004, followed by completing an oncology pharmacy residency at Mountain States Tumor Institute in 2005. Dr. Maughan earned his MD cum laude from the University of Kentucky College of Medicine in 2010. He completed his internal medicine residency training at the University of Utah in 2013, followed by medical oncology fellowship at Johns Hopkins in 2016. He was awarded the Huntsman Cancer Institute Translational Scholar Award in 2019 and was selected for the 2019 SWOG Young Investigator Training Course. Dr. Maughan has clinical and research interests in all genitourinary oncology, with a particular focus on the development of novel therapeutics and in identification of predictive biomarkers. During his fellowship, he studied predictive biomarkers in metastatic prostate cancer, specifically the role of truncated androgen receptors and loss of tumor suppressors. He is currently an investigator on the MK6482 clinical trial, which was formerly known as the PT2977 trial. Dr. Maughan, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's really a pleasure to visit with you and be part of this community.
Well, we're so grateful that you're taking the time to be with us. So let's just jump right into it. Why did you first decide to study pharmacology?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I was originally, I've always been interested in biomedical research, and my original plan was to get a PhD in, I don't know, cellular physiology or something. And one of my friends was applying for pharmacy school at the time. And I had no experience with life sciences, no family members involved in healthcare or anything. In fact, I think I'd only been to a pharmacy once in my life just to pick up a prescription for my mom of who knows what it was. Anyway, so I was really loving school at the time and learning all this new information. And so it just seemed like a really interesting, attractive approach to learn more about the body and medicine. So I sort of on a whim, I applied and magically somehow got in. I still don't understand how I got accepted, but anyway, so while I was in pharmacy school is when I really started, it continued to foster my interest in research and in science, but I also really started having a lot of positive connections with patients and really appreciating the value and I don't know, the rewarding aspect of clinical medicine. So anyway, it really sort of formulated and shaped how I think about my career today.
So at what point did you decide to go for the additional education and training to become a medical doctor as well?
Oh, yeah. So that really had everything to do with deciding to go to pharmacy school. So while I was in pharmacy school and developing this love of clinical medicine, I spent a period of time trying to decide, well, okay, now I realized that I really wanted that to be part of my career. But you can do that in a lot of different ways. Obviously, because I was in pharmacy school, I could have just continued working as a clinical pharmacist. But I was really puzzled and confused by a lot of questions that weren't answered while I was in pharmacy school, especially a lot of diagnostic questions and pathology. And so I would if someone like gave me a diagnosis, I would understand how to treat it from that point forward. But I was really trying to understand, like, how do you come up with these diagnoses and what does that mean for someone's prognosis? And all of these questions that aren't really adequately covered under sort of the scope of pharmacy. And additionally, and probably most importantly, I was able to have some direct relationships with patients, but I was really looking for something that was more personal and more deep. And I really saw that the best solution for all of those issues was to pursue a degree in medicine. So I went back to school, and that's what I did.
How obviously your dual background gives you a very unique perspective. How does your pharmacological expertise play a role in your clinical work?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with that. So it really helped me develop an interest and an understanding for the sort of molecular biologic aspect of medicine. So that's ultimately why I decided to go into medical oncology as opposed to some surgical training. But in addition, it still serves me to this day to some extent because I'm really involved in a lot of early phase clinical trials. I'm not part of our phase 1 group specifically, but I am highly involved in a lot of GU-specific phase 1 trials where we do a lot of pharmacokinetics, et cetera, and my background provides some unique perspective and understanding of that part of the research.
Now, so in your background, I saw that there's a lot of work with tumor suppressor genes. How did you get interested in that, and specifically VHL?
Yeah, so the interest in tumor suppressors is because I don't know, maybe I'm always picking the hard road in life, but the development of cancers can, if you think about it from a very simplistic model, can either be through a route of alterations to oncogenes or through alteration or loss of tumor suppressors, right? Because the oncogenes are the genes that drive cell growth. So when they're turned on, it signals the cell to grow, divide, et cetera. So again, from a very simplistic model, if you have a oncogene that's constantly turned on, that could be one way that a normal cell could transform into a cancer cell. Those things historically, those alterations historically have been easier to target, right? Because it's something that's turned on, so you just create a drug that turns it off, right? Tumor suppressors, so again, thinking back to that simplistic model, you can also have a normal cell transform into a cancer cell because of loss or alteration of a tumor suppressor. So these are genes that are the opposite. They stop cell growth or division. So you can also, from that simplistic model, think if you lose these brakes or this check on the cell growth, then inherently the default is to grow. And so that's another way you can transform a normal cell to a cancer cell. These alterations have been harder to target historically because most of the time the problem is not that the tumor suppressor function is lost oftentimes because of deletion. So you actually lose the gene, it's just removed. And so the only way to sort of replace that is to somehow through gene editing physically put the copy back in the cell. Anyway, so they've just been harder to target. There's some unique, interesting ways that you can try and get around that. Besides sort of this new wave of sort of gene editing with like CRISPR, et cetera. But there's some other ways that you can sort of target that. And anyway, because of the challenge of it, intellectually, it's sort of attracted me to it. You also asked about how did I get interested in VHL, and that was really just sort of through I guess almost a seemingly random series of sequential events. So because of my interest in GU oncology, I'm heavily interested in kidney cancers, and so because of that, I sort of discovered this rare disease, if you will, and I started seeing some patients, and a lot of them quite young and quite affected. I mean, not just by the renal manifestations, but by the multiplicity of these manifestations, as our audience is very familiar with, of this disease. And so inherently, it just made me really emotionally tied to them and wanting to try and find something that we could do to significantly help improve their lives. And because I knew a fair amount about kidney cancers and kidney tumors, I figured this would be a nice way that I could try and contribute to the community. So
there's a lot of grateful patients and families that you have. What have been some of the more challenging and rewarding aspects of your job?
Well, for sure, the most rewarding is just the individual relationships that I'm able to form with patients. I mean, sometimes, there's sad events that happen in patients' lives, and I feel that to some extent as I'm sharing those experiences with them. But overall, I would say, yeah, but there's certainly many happy, positive experiences as well. But for sure, that's the most rewarding part. Again, a number of years ago when I was really just searching for my career, if you will, that was something that I discovered and really initially felt was important to me, and it has continued to remain so. Some of the challenges, there's a number of them, but I would say probably the biggest challenge for me is trying to balance these sort of two competing major demands of my particular career, which is treating patients, trying to address their needs each day, right? Because they don't have needs only on clinic days, right? But then in addition, there's also the demands to try and continue moving these research projects forward, and they don't just have deadlines that fall on non-clinic days, right? So trying to manage both of those demands each day simultaneously can be tricky. Fortunately, I've been able to sort of build, as I've been here over the last few years at the Huntsman, I've been able to build a great team that helps me try and manage those competing time demands.
It's really an amazing center. Really, and a great team you guys have there.
Yeah, I'm really happy that I was able to to come here, and I really love working here.
What has been the most memorable experience for you as a VHL specialist?
I would have to say the most memorable experience so far has been the very first time I got the scans back on our patient, on our first patient on this trial, and just that was just being, fortunately for that patient, they were having a great response, and just being able to share that experience together with them, and see and feel their excitement, that was incredibly rewarding. I'll never forget it.
I'm sure that they felt exactly the same. It's remarkable. Or I should say, why should physicians, people in the healthcare industry, and the general public care about and support VHL research?
Well, so I mean, fundamentally, from a humanistic perspective, I mean, this is a disease that substantially affects many patients' lives. Certainly not the most, it's not the most common disease in the world, but it is an important disease that affects many people. So, we have a culture in the United States where we focus not just on the majority, but also minority of people as well. So it is important that we have some emphasis and focus on this. Obviously not to the exclusion of everything else, but we still need to have some focus on this. But in addition, it's a very important disease for another reason, and that's because how this, specifically, even if we're thinking about sort of this microcosm that I live in GU malignancies, the renal manifestations of VHL are mechanistically the exact same, for the most part, as sporadic RCC. So we can learn a lot for the more broad general population that has sporadic RCC from these patients as well. And vice versa, right? So we can learn things about how to address the disease for the patients with the VHL syndrome from those that have sporadic RCC. but because we oftentimes, with our great screening guidelines now, because we oftentimes catch this disease earlier, we can understand a lot more about the biology of this cancer from this population than we do the sporadic disease population, just because we follow these patients closer, we are able to see and track these lesions more consistently, so we can learn a lot about the biology of clear cell renal carcinoma. So it's very important for many reasons.
Now, you had mentioned that that you're really on the cutting edge of research when it comes to VHL, and also Huntsman is also leading the way in research. What do you think the state of VHL is going to look like in 10 to 15 years?
Oh, in 10 to 15 years, it's going to be much, much different. So from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges with this disease so far, excuse me, is that we only have a system in place, or to the best of our knowledge today, the way that we treat these manifestations, whether it's the kidney cancers or the hemangioblastomas, whatever they are, we wait for them to become a big enough problem and then we treat them, right? Ideally, I'd say we wait for them to become a sufficient problem and then we treat them so that they don't become a really significant problem, like metastatic kidney cancer, for instance, or a large hemangioblastoma that ruptures and causes CNS hemorrhage and seizures. But what we're really lacking is a strategy to prevent it from really becoming a problem at all, and therefore obviate the need for these multiple surgical interventions that really burden these patients. But there's been a lot of work over the past few years, led through a couple of outstanding centers like the MD Anderson Center with Eric Jonas and the NIH, obviously, et cetera, where we're starting to explore strategies of how to prevent these problems from even becoming significant enough to the point where they need surgical interventions. And fortunately, at the Huntsman, we've been able to participate in sort of the most recent iteration of that sort of national clinical trial research. But in 10 to 15 years, I really expect that we're going to be doing a lot fewer surgical interventions for this disease, because we'll have more effective and well-tolerated therapies to stop the disease process, period. At least in terms of a couple of the manifestations. Some of the others we're still struggling with a little bit of how to address and treat them in the same sort of preventative, if you will, fashion, like some of the pancreatic tumors and anyways, others. But I suspect in 10 to 15 years we'll be doing a lot fewer surgical interventions for this disease, which is, I think, great news for these patients.
I could tell you that it would make an incredible difference in the lives of so many people. So we are holding our with bated breath, or whatever the saying is. If you could give patients with VHL one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say that we are in the middle of an explosion of advancements for this disease. So I think the best advice I could give them is to be happy and be optimistic, because great things are coming. Yes.
And one of the things that we're trying to do with this Spotlight program is obviously patients and families get to know you and the other clinicians in the hospital, but we also want to get to know you more as a person. So what other passions or hobbies do you have outside of the hospital?
So I used to read a whole bunch, and I guess I still do. Now it's just mostly scientific journals, but occasionally I still pick up a good novel. Right now I'm just about finished with reading the Ghosts Faust. So that's been really interesting. But I really only have time for like a single hobby for the most part, and that's been running. So I've been a runner all my life. So I still run. I don't run as much as I used to in terms of distance, right? Just because the longer distance you run, the more time it takes for that, for that event. So I used to do, triathlons and marathons, and anyway, that's been quite curtailed. And now I, have to satisfy myself with shorter distance runs. But I don't know, I've been trying to squeeze in enough time to run another marathon because my brother got me all, hyped up about running one with him. I don't know. I've started losing a little bit of motivation for it just because the one we had planned was canceled due to the pandemic. But we'll see. I've still been running, but yeah, I really enjoy distance running. When it's sort of zen, I guess, for me. Once you get out, especially as you start getting, building up your endurance to those longer distances, it's just the consistency of it, your pace. It's just very, I don't know, it's emotionally soothing. You just go. So.
Well, hopefully one of the events as part of the family weekend in Salt Lake City is going to be a VHL 5K. So hopefully
really?
you'll be able to join us for that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I'm definitely there.
And for those attending the annual family weekend in Salt Lake City in October, a lot of people are going to be coming in from out of town. What is your favorite restaurant that is unique to Salt Lake City that everyone should go to?
So there's a couple of pubs that have some nice craft beers and stuff that a lot of people enjoy, like the Red Rock Brewery. But what I really like is so I think those are worth considering. But one of my favorite restaurants is this small restaurant that's fairly close to the hospital. It's in this section like up on the hill called the Avenues, and it's unexcitingly they call themselves the Avenues Bistro. But it's in just this very nice, tree-ish, pleasant, quiet part of town, and because you're up on the hill, up on the bench. While you're there, you can get some nice views of the valley, and anyway, it's just a very, maybe zen is my thing, I guess. It's just a very zen, relaxing, pleasant place to enjoy. So
sounds lovely. Now we have a few questions from our live audience. Dr. Maughan, are you familiar with families who might have more than one mutation? For example, a family that might have a VHL as well as SDHB or something like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's not, at least from my experience, it's not particularly common, but it can happen, right? Most patients develop this disease because of an inherited issue. But occasionally patients develop this problem because of sporadic mutations or alterations that happen during embryogenesis, that then they become sort of the founder, the first one in their family, and then they can spread it on from there. And so for multiple mutations, effectively what has to happen is both of those things occurring together, right? So you inherit some problems, plus you additionally, that individual separately develops a germline sporadic mutation. So it's not common, but it can happen.
Another one of our live viewers wrote that their mom was one of the first 100 diagnosed with VHL in the early 90s. How common was the disease then versus now?
So it appears with more subsequent follow-up and data that we have that the incidence or the frequency of this disease hasn't really changed. It's just our ability to diagnose it has, and our recognition of it. That's fundamentally a couple of shared problems across most rare diseases, is the recognition of it, because unless you think about it as being a potential diagnosis, for the most part, you don't arrive at that diagnosis, right? So if you see a young patient with kidney cancer, unless you think, oh, there might be an inherited problem like VHL or Birt-Hogg-Dubé or something like that, then as the clinician, you may just accept that they have this unusually young age of diagnosis for kidney cancer and just move on and think, oh, they just had it sporadically. So you have to think about it to make the diagnosis. And again, these rare cancers, are rare diagnoses, there's a lot of them, not just in cancer, but in also other diseases, like there's rare forms of epilepsy, et cetera. So unless you think about it, you're not going to make the diagnosis. And initially that was sort of the challenge, but now it's much more understood and respected, at least within the urology community, et cetera. So fortunately, we're catching more of these, and also with, one other great advance over the last couple of decades with medicine is this sort of team building approach. And one core critical piece of most of our oncology teams anymore is genetic counselors. And so now we have better ways of doing cascade testing, or better resources to do cascade testing, et cetera. So now we're able to catch more of these families. And so anyway, we're diagnosing it better than we once were. But the absolute frequency of the disease hasn't fundamentally appeared to change.
That's a really interesting point. Dr. Maughan, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today, as well as for everything that you're doing for your patients in the clinical setting, as well as the research you're conducting. Everybody in the VHL community really appreciates it. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
You're welcome, Josh. It was really a pleasure to visit with you. And again, I always love talking about this. So anytime.
Thanks. For everybody watching at home, you'll be able to meet Dr. Maughan in person at this year's VHLA Annual Family Weekend, hosted by Huntsman Cancer Institute in Salt Lake City, Utah, on October 23rd to the 25th. You can find more information about the weekend, including registration, at vhl.org/family-weekend. You can find more information about the VHL Comprehensive Clinical Care Center at Huntsman by going to vhl.org/Huntsman. We hope you'll join us for future events, including the Annual Family Weekend. Until next time, stay safe.